major issues. President Joe Biden announces more resources to control COVID as conditions deteriorate on the southern border. Spending standoff. Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill square off in a battle over money. One lawmaker's perspective. Hear what Representative Mike Gallagher is telling us about the topic. And fight for the unborn. The Justice Department takes a stance against a pro-life law. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sabol. President Joe Biden says the U.S. will now buy 1 billion doses of Pfizer's COVID-19 shots to share with the world. That is double his original pledge. He is hoping to see 70% of the planet's population vaccinated next year. But critics complain the poorer countries are still not getting the shots they need. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, President Joe Biden held a virtual vaccination summit laying out the tragic and grim numbers and warning that the COVID crisis will not be solved with just, in his words, half measures.
President Joe Biden says we've all suffered.
The United States has lost more than 670,000 of our fellow Americans. Worldwide, the death toll is above 4.5 million people.
The president called America the arsenal of vaccines.
Today, I'm announcing another historic commitment. The United States is buying another 500 million doses of Pfizer to donate to low and middle-income countries around the world.
And President Biden is also urging other high-income countries to step up their pledges, emphasizing donating doses, not selling them, and acknowledging it will not be easy.
Getting those vaccines into people's arms may be the hardest logistical challenge we've faced.
Another challenge, the southern border. Many Haitian migrants camped in a small Texas border town are being released in the United States. That goes against the Biden administration's public statements that the thousands in the camp faced immediate expulsion.
Our policies, our border restrictions are being applied not just to Haitians, but to people who are coming irregularly to migrate to the country from anywhere.
Meanwhile, Mexican volunteers showed up at an improvised camp by the Rio Grande River to bring food and clothes to Haitian migrants. And an angry France, now on speaking terms again with the U.S. Word from the White House today that President Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron spoke by phone over that recent submarine spat, agreeing that the situation would have benefited from open consultations among allies. France's ambassador, who was polled, will return to the U.S. next week.
Now back to the U.S. southern border. Tonight, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and Catholic Charities USA is urging the U.S. government to treat Haitian migrants humanely. They have been through so much. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
While the Democrat-run House has passed a measure to keep the government open and raise its borrowing limit, Senate Republicans are expected to block it. Meantime, progressive Democrats are pushing back on the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales runs down the details.
Imagine having an open credit card till the year 2022. How much federal spending could you rack up under those terms? Well, that's exactly the measure passed by House Democrats last night to keep the government running till September 30th. Now it's in the hands of the Senate, where Senate Republicans say it's up to Senate Democrats to raise the debt ceiling on their own.
If Washington Democrats want to jam through trillions of dollars in reckless spending all by themselves, they can raise the debt limit all by themselves.
Democrat Majority Leader Chuck Schumer doesn't see it that way. He says both parties are responsible for raising the debt ceiling now because most of the spending happened because of COVID relief bills.
It was passed when Trump was president, when McConnell was leader, with Democratic support. So this debt that we are asking to be spent is all Trump debt.
Republicans say that's not the truth, claiming the debt ceiling must be raised because of excessive spending by Democrats now.
The debt ceiling has expired. The suspension expired July 31st. Everything that was done last year, that was already taken care of in the debt ceiling suspension. So this is for what they're doing now.
Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republicans have introduced bills that don't include raising the nation's debt ceiling but keeps the government open.
Our legislation would fund the government through December. It would restore the defensive assistance for our ally Israel that House Democrats stripped out to appease some of their worst elements of the far left.
Without a deal, the government partially shuts down at the end of the month. Meanwhile, there is Democratic Party infighting over the cost and scope of the human infrastructure bill. Members of the Democratic Progressive Caucus say they're prepared to vote no next week on the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure measure if the Senate hasn't already passed the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill. Now the president and his team are meeting with some Democrats to make sure everyone is on the same page. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And joining me now is Republican Representative Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin. Representative Gallagher, thank you so much for your time today. Great to see you. A lot to talk about, but first, as we just heard, and as you know, the House passed a budget bill along party lines to raise the debt ceiling. I'd like to get your thoughts on that and what you think comes next.
Well, I think it's a mistake to consider these two bills separately. Well, one, we've been out of session for 7 weeks. We've been in session for 3 days in the last 7 weeks. We come back, and then Speaker Pelosi tries to jam a continuing resolution with a debt ceiling increase down our throats. It makes absolutely no sense. This is something we should have been working on the last few months, and it's a political move. She just wants to have Republican cover for making room for passing a upwards of $5 trillion increase in federal spending. And that leads us to the infrastructure bill and the Bernie Sanders socialist spending spree. This is going to be a mad dash to see how much money can be spent in the next few weeks. And I think you have to consider both of these bills as effectively one bill. Right now, we don't know if the Democrats are going to get the votes to pass one or the other, but I really think we need to take a step back and consider how broken our budget process is and just how much money we're adding to the federal debt. I think it's going to have damaging long-term consequences.
Yeah, and talking about that human infrastructure bill, there is a lot jam-packed in there, but one thing that isn't in there is pro-life protections. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it used to be, though the parties disagreed on the issue of abortion, there was agreement on the Hyde Amendment that no federal taxpayer dollars would go towards abortion. And unfortunately, the Democrats have completely abandoned those provisions, abandoned the Hyde Amendment protections, and this bill has no Hyde Amendment protections. And if you couple that with some of the bills that they're going to be putting on the House floor as a standalone bill that would allow abortion until the moment of birth, they've really adopted a very extreme position. I mean, this goes well beyond Roe versus Wade. It allows discriminatory abortions on the basis of a baby's sex, race, and disability. It's really unconscionable. All of these bills they're really bad bills, and I think anyone who's pro-life needs to fight as hard as possible against them.
Absolutely, very concerning indeed. On a different topic, I understand you are co-chair of the Friends of Australia caucus. Can you talk to us more about that, and also, if you will, the strategic military alliance that formed between the U.S., UK, and Australia, and the importance of it?
Well, Australia's really been at the leading edge of competition with China. They've been the subject of withering economic coercion from China after they had the temerity to suggest that we need an investigation into the origins of coronavirus, and years before when they started to pass laws to get at the issue of Chinese influence in their domestic politics. The Chinese have done everything to intimidate them, harass them, and economically coerce them. And they're standing strong. I think they're providing an example for us, and we need to stand with them. For over 100 years, we've fought side by side in every war. Americans and Aussies have fought together. As co-chair of the Friends of Australia caucus, I see the benefits of this alliance every single day. And this latest agreement that's being called AUKUS, I think is a good agreement. I think it's a chance to enhance our cooperation, particularly on defense issues. I think it's a big win. We're going to be helping them with nuclear sub technology, some missile development technology, and ultimately that's going to improve our ability to stand up to China together with our allies. So this is a big win for the United States, and we need to make sure that we're supporting our mates in Australia.
Yeah, we have about a minute left or so, but I really want to talk about this. It's been about a month or so since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan, and so much has transpired since then. It's really almost too much to summarize. That said, could you give us your thoughts on how you see things playing out in Afghanistan now under Taliban rule, and what that could mean for us here in the U.S., in particular for Homeland Security?
Well, we've abandoned hundreds of Americans behind enemy lines, and I've seen no plan from the Biden administration to rescue our own citizens, and many of the Afghans that fought with us. We've effectively abandoned them to a terrorist regime in Afghanistan. And I think what we're going to see more broadly is an increase in the threat from terrorism. Even General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, admitted that al-Qaeda stands to benefit from our withdrawal. And so in some ways, I think we might see what we saw after the withdrawal, the precipitous political withdrawal from Iraq, which is that we have a massive increase in terrorist groups and increase in threats to the homeland. And that's why I oppose the withdrawal and why I think we're going to be in for a rough ride going forward.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We have to wrap it up. Great to have you on. Representative Mike Gallagher, thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, ahead of the Supreme Court hearing in the pro-life case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, the Justice Department has filed a brief arguing on the side of Roe v. Wade, whose precedent legalized abortion in the United States. Oral arguments take place December 1st. The president of the Catholic University of America is stepping down in June. John Garvey has been in the role since 2010. He says it was an honor and a privilege to serve as CUA's president. The 72-year-old graduated from the University of Notre Dame and Harvard Law School. Catholic University officials say they plan on naming a replacement by July 1st. The tiny European nation of San Marino will vote on whether to legalize abortion. The nation of around 35,000 people will consider whether to allow abortion up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. Abortion has been illegal in the country since 1865. San Marino is 90% Catholic. At the UN today, Turkey's president says his country can no longer accept refugees from Afghanistan or Syria.
Ve Afganistan gibi çatışma kaynaklı kriz bölgelerinin yol açtığı
President Erdogan requested shared global responsibility for those displaced from the two nations while affirming help for Afghans. He warned that Turkey has already taken in 4 million Syrian immigrants due to the civil war. In Afghanistan, Taliban forces suffered 3 attacks yesterday. In one strike, an unknown gunman opened fire at a local gas station, killing 2 Taliban fighters as well as an attendant and a child separately. A vehicle was bombed, killing 2 other fighters and a child. A third vehicle was also bombed, wounding a bystander. Well, averting a default, the struggling Chinese real estate conglomerate Evergrande will make a scheduled interest payment tomorrow. Additionally, China's state bank has injected the equivalent of $18.6 billion of liquidity into the system to calm global markets. Investors fear negative impacts from heavily indebted Chinese real estate developers. Coming up, congressional matters. Get analysis of the problems facing lawmakers. And traditional blessing, why thousands of Jewish worshipers gathered at the Western Wall. Well, as we mentioned earlier, Congress is racing to find a way to avoid a government shutdown, and U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says failing to raise the debt ceiling would produce a widespread economic catastrophe that would permanently weaken the United States. Joining me now to discuss this is Matt Dickerson, director of the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation. Matt, welcome. Great to see you. Let's talk more about this raising the nation's debt limit. How can that help or harm our economy? And what do you think of Secretary Yellen's comments? I mean, do you think that failing to increase the debt ceiling will lead to a catastrophe?
Great. Thanks for having me with you today. We have reached the debt limit. It was reached on August 1st, and the Treasury is currently using what are called extraordinary measures to continue financing the government right now. But traditionally, reaching the debt limit has served as a bipartisan wake-up call for Congress to start addressing the thing that has caused us to reach the debt limit, which is spending too much. And instead of giving a blank check, which President Biden and Secretary Yellen are asking Congress to do so they can continue spending more and more and more. What Congress should be doing is turning the tide and starting to address overspending.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, this really isn't the first time that the debt ceiling has been increased. Can we talk more about that, why it happens, and the impact of that?
Absolutely. For many years, Congress has increased the debt limit or suspended the debt limit, which allows Congress to continue overspending. And that's why the national debt has increased up to $28 trillion just in the last year and a half. More than $5 trillion has been added to our national debt. And that's due to spending more than we're taking in at the federal level. And that's completely irresponsible. Nobody would run their family household like that or their small business like that. And eventually, we're going to have to address the debt. And it's caused by just too much spending. And going back decades, when we have reached the debt limit, Congress has worked together on a bipartisan basis to address the cause of reaching the debt limit and tried to slow the growth of spending.
Yeah, and something that's actually impacting all of us right now is inflation. We're seeing that in the rising costs of things like fuel and food. Where do you see this going? Do you think prices will continue to rise, or do you think that we'll see a leveling off?
That's a great point, and something that's on the minds of a lot of viewers as we speak. President Biden and Speaker Pelosi are trying to jam through a massive $3.5 trillion reckless tax and spending package. And that's only going to throw more fuel on the fire and increase the risk of inflation. And that's why they're asking for a suspension of the debt limit so they can increase spending as much as they want to, which will certainly have negative impacts on the American economy, and people will feel it in their pocketbooks.
Yeah, Matt, and a lot of people are wondering, are we headed towards a recession or possibly a depression? Your thoughts on that?
I would certainly hope not. But I would say increasing taxes just as the economy is starting to recover, as President Biden has proposed, I think would be the wrong policy prescription. Instead, we should be reducing taxes and addressing things that are causing the supply chain interruptions, which is too much regulation, too much uncertainty throughout our economy.
Another thing I want to touch on, Matt, we mentioned this earlier in the show, the Chinese real estate giant Evergrande and the latest developments there. How do you see that playing out there? And do you think that could have an impact here in the U.S. and on our markets?
Absolutely. I think as we've seen, the global economy is more interconnected now than it ever has before. And so bad decisions happening in other countries could certainly affect the country's economy here domestically. So that's why it's really important for us here in America to have good, sound economic policy that allows our private sector, our private market to withstand any negative impacts that might be coming in from abroad. So that's why it would be a big mistake for a massive tax and spending package that will make it harder for our economy to recover and withstand any shocks like that could be coming from China.
Well, Matt, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you weighing in. Matt Dickerson, director of the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Up next, the dangers of consumerism. Pope Francis signals trouble for the faith in Europe. And relief organization, how a Swiss-based group is trying to relieve human suffering. While thousands of Jews attended the priestly blessing at Jerusalem's Western Wall today. A coronavirus lockdown restricted participation last year. Today's ceremony is part of the 7-day celebration of Sukkot. The rituals recall God's provision for Israel in the desert during the exodus from Egypt to the Promised Land. Well, Pope Francis says the faith in Europe is being weakened by consumerism.
Ho visto tanta speranza negli occhi dei giovani.
At his weekly talk to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says humble love and a return to God are especially needed on the continent. He also reflected on his recent trip to Hungary and Slovakia, calling it a pilgrimage of prayer and hope. Well, MedAir is a Swiss-based humanitarian organization inspired by Christian faith. In 30 years, the group has worked in nearly 40 countries to help millions of vulnerable people. Today, the organization is recognized humanitarian NGO with more than 1,200 team members in a dozen countries. Joining us now from Rome is Jean-Bernard Palthy, Engagement Director at MedAir. Jean-Bernard, thank you so much for your time today. Good to see you. Can you tell us more about your organization and your mission, and also how it's informed by the Christian faith?
Sure. So I'm working for MedAir. MedAir is an emergency health response organization, meaning that we go to most devastated places and to reach most vulnerable people. And that can be because of natural disasters, because of conflicts, because of pandemics. And we want to provide life-saving assistance to people, meaning that we provide basic health services, we provide nutrition, access to safe and drinkable water, we provide shelter for refugees. And our mandate is really to go, I would say, beyond the extra mile, where places are the most remote or the most dangerous to get there because of conflicts or security. And this is where we want to go, because we believe that each life matters, and we are ready to do everything that's possible to reach those people that are in deep need.
And can you tell us, what countries are you currently bringing your help to?
Yes, we are today in 13 countries like Yemen, Syria, Congo, Madagascar, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Jordan, Lebanon, and we have different programs in these countries. Either it can be really psychosocial support to refugees, it can be distribution of non-food items, it can be access to safe water. And each time we go there, of course we want to bring material, life-saving assistance, but what is also extremely important for us is to really connect with people, to meet people. We are inspired by our Christian faith, and we want to be, in a way, the hands of Jesus, where we want to take care of the poorest of this world. And for us, it's very important to create a connection with these people. We want to get to know them. We want to restore their dignity. We want to restore hope. And that's why we have a variety of programs. And we are ready to stay as many years as it would take to make sure that we could restore capabilities.
Yeah, and before I let you go, I understand that you met the Holy Father earlier today. What can you tell us about that meeting, and what did he have as far as a message for you?
Yeah, so it was a very touching meeting this morning. We feel a great connection with Pope Francis, because he's always saying that we need to go to the periphery, and this is exactly what we do in our work. We go to the periphery of the world. We go where nobody goes. And so we feel a very strong connection with our Pope Francis. And his message was to us was, yes, I'm going to pray for you and for your teams, and what you do is good. Please keep on going. So you can imagine how encouraging it was for us to receive this message. And of course, he asked us to pray for him, and this is exactly what we did just after the meeting. We gathered all together to pray for the Pope and to say thank you to the Lord for this the opportunity we had to have this meeting with our Pope. So it was really a great source of joy for all of us and great encouragement. So we are extremely grateful for this moment.
Well, Jean-Bernard, thank you for all that you all do. We appreciate it, and thank you for your time today. Jean-Bernard Palthy, Engagement Director at MedAir. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night and God bless.